I can just introduce
Yeah, correct.
yeah, myself. So hi all, thanks for inviting us. This is Alok Patnia, managing partner at Tax Mantra Global. We are a global tax and legal firm based out of India, Singapore, and the US. Uh, we help businesses, growing businesses, tech businesses in their global expansion, entity structuring, global structuring, fundraise, in addition to the regular tax and regulatory compliances. Uh, I have got close to 20 years of experience in doing this, and thanks Learning Labs and Sumit and the team for inviting us to do this webinar. I've got Rahul with me. He is a partner at Tax Mantra Global with us for close to 10 years now, expert in global international taxation. And today we would be discussing very interesting topic. So this topic came about when I was discussing with Sumit in terms of the global structure, and he said there are a lot of misconceptions, confusions. People don't know what to do in terms of starting right way, in terms of going global, and so we have tried to cover why someone would want to, Rahul, if you can move the slide to the next, if someone would want to start outside India, uh, am I audible? Abhilasa says
Eh,
that,
Yeah, you are audible.
yeah. So we will cover in terms of why someone would want to set up outside India. What are the best ways to set up outside India? What are the do's and don'ts when you go and set up outside India? What are the tax regulations which are required when you set up outside India? We do a comparison between India, Singapore, Dubai, Singapore, US. We'll also talk about tax havens little bit, and we will be open for Q&A if there are specific questions which someone would want to ask. So as Saras has said that you can ping your questions in the chat box, and I see that I already have a lot of queries already. So without further ado, I request Rahul to start the detailed presentation.
Yeah, look, you can start. I think Zoom is having Facebook bug as of now. We'll just do in
So
Zoom
there
itself.
there
No
there are
problem.
few days when there are, I have also faced this. So there are few days when this bug will not let you. So
Correct.
what you can do is you can maybe do a YouTube live or something, or anyway. I'm also recording this because I
Yeah,
also
we
need
will
to do
post
my
the
team.
recording later. Don't worry.
Yeah. Fine.
Okay. We'll start. So Rahul, you can start. Anyway, we have full attendees. We have can accommodate around 70 attendees more here. If anyone want to join, they can join here. So,
Thanks, Saras. Thanks, Alok, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. So, we are starting with the reasons why one would think about setting up outside India, why one would want to go outside India. So, based on our experience, what we have seen that people would want to go outside India if there is a commercial reason, there is a business, there is a customer base. You want to launch in the US market, you want to tap the Southeast Asia market. Uh, Local presence at times does make a difference. People do want to engage with local entities, get into agreements with local entities. So, getting customers, tapping new market is something which is most significant. And second, again, if there is a specific resource set available, skill sets available, consultants, suppliers, vendors are available, tangible and intangible resources and infrastructure is available, one would want to set up in those countries. At times, people would go to certain countries to get the access to the investors, the investor ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, and get the benefit of the pool of investors available in that country. IP protection is a major reason when we want to go global. IP protection globally is something which is very important. So people would, when they expand, they would want a protected IP for their goods for their, especially their products and services, and so they would want to safeguard their IP in a jurisdiction where they can better protect it legally. Then there are ease of doing related reasons, how easily the entities, the companies can be set up, how easily fund can be raised, how easily the entities can be shut down and one can exit, efficient tax structure and regulatory requirements, capital control. So the place where we are setting up should have a low capital control so that inflows and outflows of funds, foreign exchange is easy, and and the most important is stable tax laws. So the clarity should be there around what kind of tax laws are there and what repercussions one would be having by setting up in those jurisdictions. So stable tax laws along with low incidence of tax, the effective tax is something which becomes a reason for setting up in different jurisdictions.
Yeah, Rahul. So mostly these are the reasons why someone would
Moving
want
forward,
to.
because we are
Yeah, yeah, Rahul. You can
please, please.
continue.
Okay, so as we are discussing this in a community where we have a lot of digital and internet entrepreneurs and affiliate marketeers, so we have tried to focus our presentation towards what are the pain points and what are the regulatory compliance, painful regulatory compliance which they usually face in India when they are operating in India. So we'll quickly go through those. So, as you would be aware, all foreign payments from India does attract withholding taxes if we are doing it for our business purpose and we are booking it as a expense. So, we have seen many companies who just companies or the founders of the company who just use their credit and debit card to swipe it to incur foreign payments, and auto debits are used to make the foreign payments. So that is good as long as it is for personal purpose, but as soon as the requirement comes for booking it as a business expense, withholding tax, the TDS related compliances, and each and every foreign payment requires 15 CACB compliance, which is a form filed with the income tax department, and non-filing attracts disallowance of expense in our books, and also it attracts interest and penalty. So this is something which being digital entrepreneurs, there are a lot of foreign vendors one would want to engage with. There are online advertisement companies one would engage with. There can be writers, bloggers, freelancers whom we work with. There can be different marketing agencies. There can be different vendors whom the company would be working, and all those may require foreign payments. And these foreign payments, each and every payment has to undergo this 15 CACB and withholding tax compliance at least. So this is something which is painful to do each and every compliance, especially uh, if we have number of vendors. So we know a company which is into sports content, and they have more than 500 freelancers whom they engage to write for them on the sports related content. So if there are 500 freelancers who write for them, and they are based across the globe, doing every monthly or weekly payment to them and doing the TDS compliance and 15 CACB compliance for all of them becomes a pain point. So
So to just to summarize, these are the six top reasons why an online digital entrepreneur would want to look about setting outside India, and these are the pain points for each and every digital entrepreneur in terms of withholding taxes for each of the transaction which Rahul has suggested, in terms of TRCs, obtaining a TRC and getting an Indian PAN, then the reverse charge which is there on the ad spend, which most of the affiliate marketers would do. Equalization levy is the new beast which has come in, And capital control is also a big challenge. And to add to that, capital gain when you exit. So I think these are the top six reasons which are a big pain for all the digital entrepreneurs. They are out.
Yes. So moving forward, so this is just an example extract from the Facebook for Business page, wherein they say that so because of these issues, because of just foreign payment related compliances which we discussed in the earlier slide, so many larger enterprises, they have started their India offices and India entities. And for instance, Facebook has started this, and they say that the the customers in India, they can like they'll have to pay the GST, which would be 18% on the invoices raised by Facebook on them through their India entity, and the customer will also have to undergo the TDS compliances. Usually, TDS is at the rate of 2%, which is for contractors. So Facebook is an example wherein because of those things, they have moved to India and have started billing in Indian rupee and through their Indian entity. But still, this GST liability of 18% remains, where the funds may get stuck for the businesses, and compliances still have to be done. However, there are many smaller companies who don't have the bandwidth to come and start in India, and still the foreign payments have to be done, as we discussed in the earlier slide. So, seeing these pain points, many, and the reasons, the benefits of going global. So many entrepreneurs, they go for setting up outside India, and we'll discuss the important aspects and things to be careful about when one is setting up outside India. So there are again these six very important things which have to be kept in mind. So all forex related transactions, holding of foreign securities, having equity shares outside India is governed by the FEMA Act, and RBI governs it in India. So all such transactions gets covered under the FEMA laws. Then we have income tax laws, wherein transfer pricing is an important aspect, where all transactions with related enterprises, associated enterprises, transactions between holding subsidiary, transaction between uh, two entities wherein we have common management, common control, common shareholding, the transfer pricing laws becomes applicable. Then there is this concept of place of effective management. POEM, it is again part of the Income Tax Act and income tax rules, wherein for companies having turnover of more than 50 crores, the income tax department has the right to check where the company is effectively controlled from. Even if it is a foreign entity and effectively controlled from India, the Indian tax department has rights to tax it. And but the POEM rules, they get triggered when we cross 50 crores. We'll discuss all this in detail in our next slides. Then there are general anti-avoidance rules, GAR, which is again part of the Income Tax Act. And there are other rules and regulations of the specific country in which one is setting up. So these are the six most important things which one should consider before setting up. And there are implications and repercussions of all these six things which can impact the continuity of a business. So we'll go through FEMA and RBI compliance quickly. So all direct investment outside India, either through the automatic route or approval route. So RBI has provided automatic route for certain sectors and for certain amount of investment, where prior approval of RBI is not required for making investment outside India. However, there is a requirement of reporting requirement is there. So there is no prior approval required, but filings with the RBI has to be done to report such transactions. And then there is a approval route wherein for restricted sectors or for making investments above certain threshold, the approval from the RBI and Government of India has to be obtained. But be it automatic route or approval route, one has to go through the ODI route for acquiring equity in entities outside India. So it can be fresh equity through the ODI route, or it can be a secondary sale purchase from someone else. That also gets covered under the FEMA and RBI laws. And so there is a concept of joint venture wherein a person is holding not whole of the equity but part of the equity, and and another form of entity can be wholly owned subsidiary of Indian entities. So all such setups, all such transactions wherein equity is acquired is covered under the ODI and the FEMA laws. For individuals in India, resident individuals, the government has this liberalized remittance scheme with LRS scheme, wherein resident individuals, they are allowed to make a investment of up to 250,000 US dollars per financial year, and that money can be used for buying equity, shares, debt instruments, immovable property, or investing in the stock market of the overseas market. This limit of 250,000 USD is a cumulative limit for one financial year for making all such investments during that year. And this is also inclusive of certain expenses like pay expenses, traveling expenses, personal travel travels, medical expenses, study or gift related expenses, donations made outside India, all inclusive. This is a limit of 250,000 USD, which is close to 1.85 crores at the current rate. And so if uh, if the remittance outside India for these purposes up to $250,000, it does not require a prior approval from the RBI, but yeah, there are reporting requirements. And above this, definitely it has to go through the approval route, wherein prior approval is required from the RBI and Government of India.
So
This is
basically, what Rahul is saying is that up to this limit, you can move ahead and do the investment, or set up a company outside India, do the capital transfer and everything, but still your ODI filing and RBI filing is mandatory. Above this limit, if someone wants to do at the individual level, then they need to have a written approval from RBI saying why you want to invest more than this, and why we are focusing on this investment is when you set up a company. So many people would be thinking that why we are discussing about this limit. Whenever you set up a company outside India, there is a share capital. Interestingly, I was talking to an entrepreneur some time back, and he said that I have set up a company in US 4 years back, and till date I have not even transferred the share capital. So share capital is the capital which you need to transfer after you set up the company. And while transferring that capital, you report with the RBI through your bank. So when you are sending, so even if it's a $500 or $1 setup which you are doing, so if you go and set up a company in US and the capital is $7,000, so you tell your bank that I have just opened a company, I need to set up the capital structure there, so please help me to remit $1,000 to this company. And at that point of time, the bank will do RBI compliances on your behalf. Uh,
yes,
so we
exactly,
so
Alok.
so that is ODI compliance. So many of you would not know that capital, sending capital is a part of compliance, and which is mandatorily need to be done. Uh, Bhuji, we will take up, you have sent more queries. We will take up all the queries at the end of the session. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, Rahul, you can continue.
So the LRS scheme limit which we discussed is applicable to residents, individuals, and there is also a limit on under the automatic route for Indian entities, Indian companies who want to set up foreign offices or foreign branches, foreign subsidiaries. And for them, the limit is 400% of the net worth of the Indian company as per the last audited balance sheet. So it's not that Indian company can invest any amount of money in a setup outside India. The total investment is capped up to 400% of the net worth of the Indian entity as per the last audited report. And further, there is a cap of USD 1 billion, wherein even if this 400% limit is achieved, still if the total investment exceeds USD 1 billion, then the RBI approval is required. And for lesser amount, one has to check the net worth of the Indian company as per the last audited balance sheet, and it should be within the 400% limit. If the investment exceeds the 400% limit, then again prior approval of the RBI and Government of India is required. And within the 400% limit also, the RBI reporting requirements still exist under the ODI rules. There is a form ODI which has to be filed with the RBI through the banker who helped transferring these money for the setup or towards share capital of those entities, and even towards expenses of those entities.
Yeah, yeah.
So the FEMA Act, they define Indian party and resident individuals separately. Indian party usually includes Indian company, partnership firms, limited liability partnerships, or an incorporated body under certain statute. And individuals are people who stay in India, who have been tax resident in India, and they have stayed for 182 days or more in a financial year in India. So there are also restrictions on round tripping and setup of a step down subsidiary. So we'll take it up again in detail when we discuss other aspects. But primarily, investment money going from India. So an Indian entity or an Indian individual setting up a foreign entity by sending money from India and then bringing back that money into India again by way of an investment by forming another subsidiary of the foreign entity, which is anyway held by the Indian person or Indian entity. So that is something which is considered as a step down subsidiary and is restricted by RBI specifically and in the RBI circular. And it also falls under the definition of round tripping, which is prohibited by RBI. And if RBI finds out that any such transaction is done, then inquiries are conducted and the companies are
So what Rahul is saying, that if today I set up a company in a foreign company, and that foreign company cannot directly create a subsidiary in India, but there are suggested structures which we discuss later. Yeah, Rahul, we can move to the next point.
So then a very important part of the Indian Income Tax Act are the transfer pricing provisions. So transfer pricing provisions are applicable to all transactions which happen between international transactions which happen between two related or associated enterprise. And there is a definition of associated enterprise which is very, very wide, and it covers like if there is 26% or more shareholding in the two entities by a common person, or one entity holds 26% or more in another entity, it gets covered under the definition of associated enterprise. Plus use of common brand name, use of common know-how, knowledge, process, and one entity being supplier to another entity and leading to 90% of the supply of material or services, or more than 90% of the sale of one entity is constituted uh, because of supplies from other entities. All these makes two entities as related and associated enterprise, and on all those entities transfer pricing provisions, they become applicable. And the concept of transfer pricing says that the transaction should happen at arm's length price. By arm's length price, we mean that if it were a unrelated, uncontrolled, in an unrelated and uncontrolled environment, what would be a cost of equivalent transaction? So that cost and that that value of the goods or services should be maintained even when the transactions are happening between two related enterprise. And for
So
that, there, yeah,
yeah,
hello.
so what Rahul is basically saying is that uh, transfer pricing is a requirement which most of the digital entrepreneurs, because they would have some related party transaction. So if you have any entity in India, or and if you do a transaction with a related party, suppose you open a company in US, and there are transaction between your Indian entity and the US entity, then there are specific reportings which are required to be made, and there are uh, stringent penalties if you do not report those transactions separately in Form 3CB. So Form 3CB is a form which is required to be done by a chartered accountant every year. I think this is very, very critical. Most of the businesses, they have a company in India and then they have a company in US, and any transaction between two companies need to be separately reported to the government. Yeah, Rahul.
Yes, and apart, so transfer pricing audit is something which is mandatory in India. If there is a single rupee of foreign transaction with related parties and associated enterprise, the transfer pricing audit related provisions becomes applicable on any Indian entity. And after crossing a threshold of 1 crore, there are a lot of documentation required, where a TP study report which has industry benchmarking uh, to substantiate that the profit margin and markup kept by the Indian entity in dealing with its foreign counterpart is acceptable as per industry standards. So those TP study reports have to be prepared and maintained. TP audit has to be done, and supporting agreements and documents have also to be prepared by the companies and kept. And transfer pricing provisions are something which are global provisions, and they are applicable to most of the countries. And all the countries across the globe, they use standard uh, globally acceptable transfer pricing principles. So mostly they are similar, like India and US, for example, have very similar transfer pricing provisions. And so it has to be seen from both the countries' perspective. If you are an associated enterprise of an US enterprise, transfer pricing from India perspective and US perspective both have to be understood and undertaken before before transacting and earning profits, because from both ends there can be scrutinies and inquiries from the related tax departments.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Moving forward, the one more thing which we have to be careful about, and even if not careful, we should be aware about that. India has double taxation avoidance agreements with close to 90 countries in the world. And under the double taxation avoidance agreement, tax withheld in one by company of one country can be used as a credit in another country. Normally, the country of residence for the entity or person provides the credit of the withholding taxes which have been deducted by companies who are set up in another countries. So uh, they are there to give the benefit to the companies transacting across borders. And so as per the Indian Income Tax Act provisions and as per the double taxation avoidance agreement provisions, whatever is more beneficial, so there are rates defined in DTAA, and there are processes and definition of different kind of income which is defined in DTAA. And whatever is more beneficial to a company or an individual, that can be taken as per the Indian income tax laws. And usually for taking the double taxation avoidance agreement benefit, there is a requirement of a corporate tax residency or a tax residency certificate, which is again obtained by the relevant tax department. For instance, in India, the income tax department issues the tax residency certificates for Indian companies, which can be provided to the foreign counterparts, which helps them either reduce the rate of TDS or uh, allow the company to make payment to your company without deduction of taxes. Similarly, different countries have their different withholding taxes and different rates applicable. And to take the benefit of DTAA, the tax residency certificate is what is mostly required. There are few countries who don't have the concept of this certificate, but most of the countries, they do have. So as we discussed initially, there is a concept of place of effective management under the income tax rule. So if there are two Indian promoters, for instance, who set up a foreign entity, and the entity does not have local presence, does not have local employees, does not have local commercial presence, and all the decisions and all the transactions are being conducted from India, and turnover of such an entity, if it exceeds 50 crore rupees, then the Indian income tax department, they have the right to uh, analyze the particular arrangement and decide. If they decide that the place of effective management is in India, then they can, even if it is a foreign entity, they can consider it as a deemed Indian entity and tax it as per the Indian tax laws, and all make all the Indian tax laws applicable on such entities. So usually there are various tests which has been prescribed by various circulars and rules prescribed by the income tax department, and based on those tests, one has to check whether place of effective management is in India or not. And there are various structures also available which enables one to uh, structure it in such a way that the place of effective management is not in India. And normally, place of effective management is determined based on where the key management and commercial decisions necessary to conduct the business of an entity as a whole are substantially made. So this is something which is important for companies who have crossed or are crossing a 50 crore turnover
And
threshold.
this and Rahul, to add to that, this is very important because many of the businesses do come and ask us that what will happen with effective place and control, and where we will go at. And so it is very important that when you set up outside India, you have proper structure and proper system so that uh, this law doesn't get in as a roadblock to you. Yeah, Rahul, we can move
Yeah.
ahead. So GAR, we get lot of queries on GAR. What is GAR? What is round tripping? What is place of effective control and management? Most of the digital entrepreneurs who are doing cross-border transactions, who are setting companies outside India, they are worried about GAR. So I think we thought that we will discuss GAR in detail. So GAR is applicable to transactions which are considered as impermissible avoidance agreements. So there may be some of the arrangements which may look like that they are being done to misuse the tax provision and to escape taxes. And Rahul, you can continue. I will pitch in wherein there is a need.
Sure, sure. So there are various provisions in the Income Tax Act under the DTAAs which can be used to with a sole purpose of avoiding taxes. And if there is an arrangement which has been done, setting up of entities and setting up of chain of entities in India, outside India, and wherein the whole objective is to avoid tax, and it does not make any bona fide commercial uh, reason for making such a structure. And even though it may look that it is as per the law, it does not contravene any of the laws or Income Tax Act directly, but still the intent is only to avoid tax. So any such arrangements are considered as impermissible avoidance arrangements under the GAR laws, IAA. And if the department and the relevant authorities, they determine a arrangement to be impermissible avoidance arrangement, then they may invoke the GAR related laws, wherein again they have enough rights and powers to unveil all the underlying interest and bring those entities even though if they are outside India, and tax it as per the Indian tax laws. But but I'll give an example for this. For instance, in Dubai we have tax-free zones. So there are many entities and many entrepreneurs we have seen who have created an entity in a tax-free zone. So now the tax-free zones are zones wherein uh, only exports and imports are allowed there, and no local business is done, and it is used just for saving taxes because taxes there are very low. So if there is an Indian business who sets up in the economic zone over there, and he does not have any commercial or business interest in say UAE or Dubai apart from using the benefit of the tax zone, and avoid paying taxes in India and moving the profits and paying taxes in the Dubai economic zone, then it can be covered under the GAR related provision because it does not have any other commercial substance. In another case, for example, if there is a setup which has been done in US, and say a Delaware setup has been done, or say a Singapore setup has been done, and that setup is also helping the company to tap the Southeast Asia market or the US market or the Canada market, and maybe it is also helping the entity to bring in more investors into the company through the Singapore entity or through the US entity, then there is a bona fide commercial and a business reason for setting up entity over there. So if there is a bona fide commercial reason for those entities, then GAR related provisions cannot be invoked. It can be invoked when the arrangement has been done with the sole purpose of abusing the tax provisions, even though under the law, but using it to avoid paying taxes in India. There are certain cases wherein GAR laws, they cannot be invoked. There are some exemptions which is provided. So again, similar to POEM rules, there is a limit of 3 crores 30 million Indian rupee of tax benefit which would accrue to all the parties involved in the arrangement. So if there are set of entities which has been incorporated and there are different stakeholders, and in aggregate for all of them, if the tax which has been avoided in India is 3 crore rupee or more, so in those cases a GAR can be invoked, but if it is up to 3 crores, then GAR related provisions would not be invoked. And then there are certain listed FIIs, there are non-residents who make investment in derivative instruments. So for them, there are certain exemptions which are available under the GAR laws. They are all part of the Income Tax Act in India. Earlier we discussed round tripping, which was prohibited by the RBI. So RBI has certain restrictions on round tripping and
So,
GAR has
so round tripping and GAR. So round tripping and GAR are two very, very critical things which all the businesses, all the entrepreneurs who want to set up outside India should look at it very closely. GAR, as Rahul said, that substantial business interest should be created. If the entity outside India has been created only to evade taxes, then GAR can be evoked. And if you invoke GAR, it's very detrimental, and you actually pay all the taxes in India, and you can the government can actually force you to close down the entity. There can be many things. So one is GAR and the other is round tripping. So Rahul, you can explain round tripping. So round tripping and GAR, very important laws which, and you have to structure in a way that you are not stuck with round tripping and GAR.
So round tripping refers to money that leaves India through various channels and makes its way back into India, often as foreign investments. So it goes outside India through various sources. It can be legal sources, it can be illegal sources, it can be by way of investment, it can be by way of profits. And from there, when it comes back to India in form of investments, and there is equity investment from outside India, but actually the money is routed through India and from India, then the both the FEMA laws and the GAR laws, they consider it as round tripping. This involves at times black money, at times genuine money, but in both the cases, uh, the round tripping provisions can be restricted by the government. And it is done through series of transactions, through series of entities which have been incorporated. And again, there is no substantial commercial purpose of doing all that apart from saving taxes or avoiding taxes, I would say. And if that is the purpose of doing all those structure and transactions, then the GAR would prohibit and would consider it under round tripping. And under the GAR regime, taxpayers will be required to demonstrate substance and commercial reasons for every transaction or arrangement that leads to an increased emphasis on documentation of the business rationale for any transaction or reorganization. So that is why what Alok was suggesting earlier, that we have to be very careful about the structure which we are creating, how the money is being invested into that entity, who is introducing share capital, from where the share capital is being introduced, are we creating a subsidiary back, are we bringing that money back into India, by what route it would come. We would not say that all these are absolutely restricted and nothing is possible. So there are available valid legal routes through which it has to be structured. So what we want to convey is that we should be very careful when we structure the shareholding of our foreign entities, of our Indian entities, the relationship between them, the overall entity level structure is something which we should get get it
So,
done through
so
a
yeah, yeah.
professional help. Yeah.
So what Rahul is saying, that setting up entity outside India is not illegal, but what is more careful, because the Indian government is very sensitive in terms of people going outside India and setting up, and they look it from the lenses that you are doing that to save taxes, which might not be the real reason many times. So what is very important is that you do the right structure in terms of who is putting the money, in terms of capital structure, relationship, where the, because Rahul, if you go to the last slide once. So for instance, I know so many entrepreneurs, they go on a holiday trip to US and swipe their card and set up a company in US. uh, they don't know that what will be the ramification, what will be the impact if they do that, and just they swipe the card, open the bank account. From the US perspective, there might be nothing, but since you are an Indian resident and you are obligated in India to do the compliances, it is very important that you do from a legal channel. For instance, if you just go swipe the card, come back, you have never done the RBI filing, so you have not intimated to RBI, you have not intimated to income tax, and the day that this comes to light, and government is very smart now, and why, and the next slide will suggest that. So many times we get queries that which are the tax havens which are all which are still there, we can save taxes, and we will go and set up in Cayman Island, we will go and set up in Dubai, and can we do that? So the next slide will from next slide will tell you what about tax havens more.
So we tax haven is a word which we have heard a lot from a long time, but its relevance over a period of time has decreased a lot. And so there were traditional tax havens earlier, which were either zero rate or near to zero rate of taxation. Uh, there are jurisdictions like Cayman Islands, Bermuda Islands, British Virgin Islands, Isle of Man, and so they earlier Mauritius was also there in this list, and so these countries, they used to maintain a lot of secrecy. They had very restricted bilateral tax treaties, and they were dependent on the foreign funds which they would which the people would keep over there, and and they would not share the details with any other countries. However, so in the year 2000, OECD blacklisted 30 nations. They were all tax havens because of their secrecy policy of secrecy and non-sharing of data with other countries in the world. And after this blacklist happened, then till 2009, 2010, we had almost zero tax havens in the world, because there are tax havens, but they are not jurisdictions which do not share any other detail with any other country. There's no more 100% secrecy which has been left with any of the tax havens. And secondly, they are also instead of being zero rate jurisdictions, they have many such jurisdictions have moved to low tax rate jurisdictions. So now we have business and financial centers. They are modern corporate tax havens who have non-zero rate of taxation, but they have very high level of transparency as per the OECD compliance standards. They share details and information with the countries across the globe. They have extensive double taxation and information sharing, bilateral tax treaties and agreements with various countries. And they are not zero tax nations. They have taxes which are lower as compared to other countries, and they attract global headquarters, and they are fairly transparent. So certain example are Singapore, Ireland, Netherlands. So they are all countries which have taxes, and they have treaties, and they work as financial centers for the global companies.
Yeah, yeah. So what we're trying to stress is that uh, low tax or tax haven is a myth now. What is more important is what are the other factors which determine in terms of which country you should choose. And that's the reason the next couple of slides will tell you why Singapore is a preferred choice for many entrepreneurs, why Singapore is doing so well, because it has kept a very nice balance of being a low tax haven and also being transparent and having tax treaties globally. So I think Singapore will give you a lot of insight in the next couple of slides. Yeah, Rahul.
Yeah. So there are some advantages which are like well known to almost everyone now. So it has a well developed economy and financial system. The registration process is fairly simple and less time taking over there. So document requirement are less, no notary or apostillation of documents are required, and entities can be set up in a short time period. And strategic and geographical location, the advantage which it gets as a gateway of Southeast Asia. And so well functioning government, and low red tapeism and corruption, robust startup ecosystem, and low tax and interest rate are some of the advantages why people would want to go to Singapore. So there are certain compliance requirement in Singapore, and one should be aware about it. So there is a requirement of local resident director. Every entity should have a local resident director, company secretary, and a registered address in Singapore. There are requirements of filing with the tax authorities, which is the IRAS over there, and annual tax returns have to be filed. This is similar to the income tax department in India. And we have ACRA over there, which is similar to registrar of companies in India, and incorporation is filed with the ACRA, and annual filings are required to be done with ACRA. There are similar to advanced tax in India, we have estimated chargeable income there, and GST is applicable, but there is a threshold limit of 1 million Singapore dollar in a financial year, that too for local sales, and not considering the export sales. So GST rate is 7%, flat 7% in Singapore, but there is a threshold of 1 million Singapore dollar, which helps many smaller companies to stay away from the GST registration and compliance. And again, audit is something which is not mandatory there. For small companies and small groups whose turnover does not exceed 10 million Singapore dollars, and or the employee strength does not exceed 50. Again, for smaller companies, audit is also something which has been exempted. So why people go to Singapore? So it has one of the lowest tax rates in Asia, a flat 17% corporate income tax. And over and above this corporate income tax, every year based on the annual budget, they do provide partial exemptions, which brings down the effective tax rate even less than 17%. Losses can be carried forward. So one more important thing is that they don't have a concept of capital gain and dividend taxes. So that is why many companies, they keep their headquarters over there, and when they exit, they sell out their shares or they raise investment, so that they don't pay any taxes, any capital gain taxes in Singapore. Similarly, dividend payouts also do not attract any taxes. GST, as I said, is flat 7% with no applicable slab. And from the income tax perspective, for first 3 years, there are income tax benefits available, wherein profit of first 100,000 Singapore dollars, we get a 75% exemption. On next 100,000 Singapore dollars, there is a 50% exemption. And so the total of 200,000 Singapore dollars, we can get a tax exemption, which is equivalent to Singapore dollars, $125,000. So for the first 100,000, the effective tax rate is less than 5%. For another 50%, it's close to 7.5%, 8%. So the effective tax rates are comparatively very low in Singapore. This was for the corporate taxes. Even for individuals, they have slabs wherein the highest individual income tax goes up to 22%, but the highest rate becomes applicable for people who have income of more than 320,000 Singapore dollars. For up to 320,000, they have progressive slab rates wherein there are 8 to 10 slabs, and based on that, those slabs, the personal income tax is paid.
So the personal income tax, it many times is 3-4% more than not more than that for most of the residents in Singapore. So we got this query many times because most of the digital affiliate marketers, they pay GST on Facebook and Google ads in India. So we got this query many times in terms of what will happen if we move to Singapore. Will we be saving on GST? So first is that there is a difference of 11% in Singapore and India for GST. Rahul, if you can explain this in detail in this chart. So 11% there is a gap, and then what is the reverse charge concept in Singapore for GST on Google ads and Facebook ads and affiliate ads, Rahul?
So from 1st January onwards, Singapore has also introduced GST under reverse charge, but the applicable GST rate is flat 7%. So in India, if you are an exporter, for instance, and you also import services, if you pay to companies like Google or Facebook or other companies outside India, you make foreign payments, then on all import of services, you are required to pay 18% GST under the reverse charge mechanism. So 18% is something which your funds gets blocked. So if you are not an exporter, it can be used as input tax credit, but if you are an exporter, you go for refund, which can be a time-taking process. However, in Singapore, you have to pay if you are a non-registered GST payer in Singapore. If you have not crossed the $1 million mark over there, then you are a non-registered person over there. So as a non-registered person, the company would charge 7% GST on you, and if you are a registered person, you pay it from your pocket, and then you can claim it as input tax credit or even refund if you are an exporter. So the concept of GST in Singapore is very similar to what we have in India, the concept of exports, the concept of claiming refunds, the concept of input tax credit, reverse charge. But the benefit is that it's very flat and straightforward, wherein there is a single rate. The rules are very straight and clear, and and the money which we use in our cash flows and fund flows, uh, which gets blocked in this whole process of paying GST and claiming it back, makes a significant difference, because it is only 7% over there and it's 18% here in India. So apart from this, we have this concept of equalization levy, which is not there in Singapore. We have this concept of 15 CACB compliance before every foreign payment, which we don't need to worry in Singapore.
You can
And
move to the next slide.
and even so, there is a very basic difference between how, so this is not related to the slide, but there is a very basic difference between how countries like Singapore and US treat the foreign service providers and how India treats them. So for instance, if in India we have a US based freelancer, or let's take a third independent country. For instance, if it is a UK based freelancer who provides blogging services to India and also to Singapore. So if they provide it to India, in India, the payment which is made to the UK based freelancer will be deemed to accrue or arise in India. So Indian company, Indian entrepreneur who is making payment to the UK based freelancer, he is required to uh, do 15 CACV compliance, deduct TDS on before making payment to that freelancer, and even the freelancer after a certain limit may be required to register and get PAN in India, pay and file taxes for the Indian portion of the income in India, because India says that any income which is originating from India is deemed to accrue or arise in India, and Indian government has right to tax that income. However, in case of Singapore and US, they don't consider a UK-based freelancer who is sitting in UK or London and providing the freelancing services from there as a as the income for that person is not considered as a taxable income in Singapore and in US by these countries. So in this case, even though Singapore may have withholding taxes in certain cases, but in this particular case, it will not attract the requirement and it does not have any tax implication there. Similarly, in US also, US is least concerned as long as the person is sitting outside India, outside US and providing the services. So this is something which is very important, and because of that, it makes whole lot of a difference. Where in India, if we are dealing with any foreigner, the list of compliances does not end, but we get a lot of relief if we move to Singapore from that perspective.
Yeah, Rahul. Yeah. So I think there were a lot of queries, and we were requested to give you few comparisons. So in next couple of slides, we will give you a comparison between Dubai and Singapore. Then we will give you a comparison between Delaware or US and Singapore, uh, and then we will open up for queries and specific issues. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we get a lot of queries about Dubai. Why Dubai, or why not Dubai, or why Singapore and why not Dubai? So Dubai, it comes to being very close to being tax-free. However, it is tax-free for its citizens. So the citizens who are in Dubai, they are not obligated to pay taxes on their income and capital gain. However, there are certain import duties which are applicable. There are certain taxes on rental property, on rental income, which a person earns over there, and also there are certain taxes on the hospitality industry. Over and above this, for last few years, the Dubai government, the UAE government has also introduced VAT. So now we have a 5% VAT over there for goods and services both. So as we discussed, like tax havens are slowly now it's becoming a myth, and most of the countries are moving to tax jurisdictions. So Dubai was dependent and is dependent a lot on oil, and when the oil economy is kind of getting disturbed and disrupted, so they are looking for different avenues for earning revenue, for keeping the economy upright and meeting the expenses. So taxes are something which are coming up in Dubai too. It has started with VAT, and Dubai does not have corporate income tax also, but that is limited to the free economic zones and special economic zones which they have created. And so when we talk about benefits of Dubai, uh, the corporate income tax which is exempt, the exemption is there only in the free zones. So Dubai has various free zones at various locations, and all of them are specific free zones. They cater to a certain kind of industry or a certain sector, and each free zone has its own set of rules and regulations, and also has their own set of entity requirements, that what kind of entity can be formed within that particular free zone. So the benefits for foreigners there is only limited to these free zones and the companies who are set up over free zone. And the major problem is that the entities which are set up in those free zones, they are not allowed to access the local market. So they cannot access the UAE and the local Middle East market. These free zones can only be used for imports and exports. So it does not give you advantage of getting access to the local businesses over there. Then, as I said, that these free zones, they prescribe the kind of entity which should be over there, the kind of structure it should be there. And if you move out of the free zones, then there is a strict restriction wherein no foreigner is allowed to hold 49%, more than 49% shareholding over there. So all foreign entities and foreign person can hold only up to 49%, and local citizens will have to hold 51% stake, which is a major roadblock. And this stake of 51% with the local person also causes concern over overall control over the economy, over the company, overall control over the bank account operations, because local citizens are also required to be part of the bank operating process, and with 51% ownership, they have free access to the bank account. So foreigners operating from there face this major problem. Over and above this, the entities set up in free zones, they have to go by the rules of that particular free zones. And as we discussed, there are different free zones with different rules and regulations. And most of these free zones, they don't allow you to open branch and representative offices. They don't allow you to open subsidiaries. So the entity over there will have to be a standalone entity. And for any other entity, for any other business or any other vertical which one wants to do, one will have to incorporate a separate entity again within that free zone or another free zone. So we'll discuss a few points why countries like Singapore would score over Dubai. So Dubai is a more cash-based economy, and it has excessive centralized control, and transparency is less in the legal and compliance system as compared to maybe a country like Singapore. And so global relations, domestic stability, and tax treaties of Singapore are way more comprehensive and widespread. And IP protection, global customer and investor confidence is also way higher. So if you're looking for a global investor and not a local Middle East based investor, uh, entity in US or entity in Singapore will make more sense from the investor confidence perspective to make the investment into your company. And next is because of close proximity, travel to Singapore is a bit more easier. So this is again extract of the FB page wherein 5% VAT has come up for UAE-based Facebook ads. So the VAT concept uh, is there in Dubai and UAE too, but at a reduced 5% rate. We'll quickly go through the norms which are there in the USA also. So usually people would go to USA only when uh, to cater to their customers. So we have many clients who have set up in US because their customer wanted to engage and sign contracts with a local entity. So to show a local face, to show a local entity and enter into contracts, setup in US becomes important for many entrepreneurs. So customer and market reach is one requirement. There are the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem is unparalleled. So for investor reaching out to investors, many people would go there. Normally, the federal tax rate, the corporate income tax there is 21%. However, we have various states, around 40 states are there in US, and every state has their own state tax laws, which are different from one another. And there are state taxes also which are applicable. And the tax which one person pays, which a company pays there in a particular state, depends upon the nexus which is created. Nexus can be physical nexus or economic nexus. So physical nexus means being having physical office in that place, stores over there, offices over there, employees being available across the state. Uh, then economic nexus is also considered, like when you make sales from one state of US to another state, that creates an economic nexus based on the address of your customer. So based on the sale also the nexus is determined, and based on that the taxability of the state taxes, they come into picture. So we have a federal and state structure there, and every state has its own income tax law, which makes it even more complicated than what we have in India. In India, at least the income tax is centralized, but there we have state and federal income tax. Apart from that, there are social security related expenses and compliances also, which are similar to labor law compliances in India. And in US, the corporations, the companies can be C Corp and S Corp. So C Corp is equivalent to India Private Limited Company, and only C Corps are allowed to have foreign shareholders, because S Corps they mandate local citizens as the shareholder only. So in the company format, we have C Corp as an option for foreigners and Indian entrepreneurs. And another option is a LLC, which is in the nature of partnership, limited liability partnership. However, LLCs are pass-through entities, and they don't have their own legal status and taxability status in the US. So if foreigners they create LLC in the US, the underlying partners of the LLC, they are actually taxed. So reporting of taxes for Indian entrepreneurs or Indian partners of the LLC in the US, and also paying the taxes on the US LLC income in India, is something which gets triggered. So that is a problem with the LLC structure. So C Corp is something which is most preferred structure, and it's very similar to private limited companies in India. And C Corps can be incorporated. C Corps can be incorporated with foreign shareholders and directors. So we don't. US does not have a requirement of a local director or shareholder, but they have certain other compliances which are applicable. So in the US, one of the state is Delaware, which is most discussed and most heard about in India. And people go to Delaware and they set up entities there because it is easy to set up. The laws there are investor friendly. And there is a myth that Delaware there is no state taxes. So this is not true. Actually, in Delaware there is no state tax, if your income is not coming from Delaware, if you are earning global income or you are earning income from other states other than in Delaware, then Delaware per se does not charge you a Delaware state tax. However, if you are having your entity in Delaware and you earn your income from, say, California, and there is an economic nexus between when you do the transactions as per the California laws, if an economic nexus is established, then you'll, even if your entity is in Delaware, because of your economic nexus with California, you'll have to register for California taxes and pay the California state taxes. So you don't pay any state taxes mostly by setting up in Delaware if you have export income. If you have income from outside USA, you would not pay taxes in Delaware at all. And if you have local income in US from other states, then depending upon the respective state laws, you'll have to pay state taxes. So why, like if we talk about the cons, that what problems can be there or why you should not go to US, we can say that because it has a complex federal and state structure. As we discussed, we have 40 states over there and all of them have their separate laws, and based on, so if you're earning revenue from 40 different states in the US, you may end up doing 40 state compliances from the state taxes perspective and doing the respective filings and registrations. So this makes the doing local business locally over there a bit difficult. And considering both the federal and the state taxes and the social security compliance, the effective tax rate are comparatively higher and at times more than what we pay in India. And yeah, we do have capital gain taxes and dividend distribution taxes in the US too. So if being an Indian entrepreneur, if you look US as a market for you, wherein you can get your business, or you look if there's an investor requirement that you should have a entity in the US to raise the investment, then we would prefer and we would suggest setting up in US and not otherwise.
Thanks, Rahul, for the detailed presentation. And so we are present as I said, in India, US, and across in US and Singapore also. So now we are open for queries. So Aman is asking that. So what is the problem with LLC? If you want to suggest him again. So Aman, the challenge with LLC is that LLC is a pass-through entity. So basically, what pass-through entity means is the taxability of LLC will only happen at the partner level. So what will happen if you have 100 million of revenue in LLC and you have a 800 something of expenses? The profit which is there is passed on to the partners, and then taxes are paid at the partner level. Now, so the taxation of partner will depend on the residency status. And if that partner stays in India, then you will be taxed as per the Indian laws. Whereas INC is very similar to a private limited company, and INC will have its own legal structure, and INC will pay taxes according to the US, and you pay taxes only when you withdraw as a salary or something from INC. Then you pay taxes as per your legal residency and in India.
To add to that, so if you become a partner in LLC, then with the annual, you will have to report your annual taxes in the US. And because you are an Indian citizen or a tax resident, you will be reporting it in the India too. However, if you are part of a C Corp incorporation, then for the incorporation, you file your taxes only in the US, and in India, you file it for your as an individual capacity, and only if you earn any income from your C Corp from your C Corp in US, then you have to report it in India. Otherwise, that particular C Corp, its profits and everything is not required to be reported in India in the normal C Corp structure.
Yeah. Then We have got few queries. So Akash is asking, I have opened a company in Delaware 2 years back, but I have not operated. What should be the compliance I need to do? So Akash, so Rahul, do you want to do just tell him the summary, and then in terms of cost, we can take it offline. But just few things in terms of what are the compliances he needs to do.
Yes, so every year there is a mandatory filing with the IRS. Usually it's the federal tax return which has to be filed. And 1120 I think is the form which is there that has to be filed every year. And over and above that, if you are, as you mentioned, you are registered in Delaware, so there is a Delaware franchise tax payment which again has to be done annually. And over and above this, if the entity is owned by foreigners, if you are holding it from India, then there are, along with the form 1120, the federal tax filing form, you'll also have to file, you'll have to check the applicability of two form 5471 and 5472. These are usually applicable when foreigners are holding shares in a company and the company transacts with those foreigners. In both the cases, these forms becomes applicable. And also, let me tell you, Akash, that the penal provisions in US are very, very stringent. And for non-filing of form 5471 and 5472, if they were applicable, and even for 1120, there can be penalties which are up to 10,000 US dollars. And they do provide some benefits in the first year of non-compliance, but later it becomes very, very difficult. So would suggest that you should get these rectified at your earliest. Otherwise it can be a big pain.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, so we have couple of questions about bank account opening in the US and payment gateway setups. Alok, would you like to attempt that?
Yeah, so bank account opening. So most of the banks in US would want you to be present in US to open the bank account, but there are couple of interesting online solutions which are there which helps you to open the bank account. One is Mercury, and then there are few more. If you can write to me, I can suggest you. So bank account, but to open a bank account, you need to have an entity there. So that is the first requirement which you need to do. Again, you once you have the bank account and you have the entity, then you can get into a payment gateway. So I think it's all linked one by one.
Yeah, yeah. So then we have a question that can we not show the credits of the income tax paid in USA and get a discount here in India in case of a LLC? So yeah, Joe, we have a double taxation avoidance agreement, India, US, they do have. So taxes paid there will be available as credit in India and we can file it. But the point we were stressing is that it brings in reporting requirements at both the places. So the compliance time and cost increases, but yeah, definitely the credit is available.
And plus that the differential tax rate can be high because in US the corporate tax is 21-22%. The income tax is also lower at that point of time, and in India the individual income tax is high. So I think from that perspective also there will be a tax differentiation also. Uh, but they are asking 75% of the shares held by local. How to handle that situation? Can you, if you tell me what is the specific query and it's related to which country, then we can tell you. So Wyoming is an interesting state. Rahul, you want to take that corporate tax query with regard to Wyoming?
So I don't think I'm very sure about the tax rate over there. We can definitely check and get back on this. Alok, you can share your views.
So this state is also uh, becoming very popular now, and the corporate tax is mostly at the same rate which is a corporate, because corporate tax remains mostly same. but there are sales tax which is fairly low, which is 5.42 or something. But we can get into a specific into this. So uh, you can write an email to us, and we will more than happy to answer. Uh, any other queries which you have? Yeah. So uh, there is a follow up thing in US with regard to payment gateway, and so the best thing is to partner in with a local citizen if that is the challenge. But there are different payment gateways which might allow you to have a relaxed uh,
No, so
option also.
Alok, this LLC related queries we have come across earlier also, that in case of LLC, they do at times want local US citizen and their SSN number for setup of the bank account and for payment gateways. And that is why for foreigners we always suggest that C corp is the best structure, wherein it is a separate legal entity. Foreigners are allowed to be shareholders, directors, and setup can be done without requirement of any local partner, local directors. So plus from a third party investor perspective, onboarding professionals as directors from all those perspective, issuance of employee stock option schemes, all these are possible and easily possible through the C corp incorporation, and that is why we suggest it as the preferred structure.
And if there is no pressing need, we suggest that you can also open in Singapore, because Singapore is easily accessible, and there are a lot of, so suppose you need to travel to Singapore to open a bank account. You can go there and come back in one day. The cost to just travel to US and come back will be more than the annual cost which you spend in maintaining a Singapore entity. In Singapore entity, even though you need a local resident director, but that is something which can be managed, and even we provide that service. Uh,
Joe
uh,
has a question that how easy it is to change the address. So yeah, address can be changed. There are certain filing requirements, Joe. So with that, it is possible. And if it is within Delaware, it's a Delaware setup, then it is easier. If the address is in some another state, then state-wise registration will be required, and the filing requirements will increase till a certain extent. Akash had a follow-up question that what is the procedure to close a company without getting penalty of Delaware? So there are concepts of closing down of the company, but before that the compliances will have to be made up to date, and closure can be cited as a reason for requesting them to waive the penalty. But again, that is on a case-to-case basis, and how things are represented with the authorities, they take a call. So we'll have to be seen on a case-to-case basis, Akash. I think we'll need more details to answer this. Any other questions?
yeah, also Bhuji had asked a query with regard to our earlier question, which said that 250K limit uh, for an individual to invest in a foreign entity. So that investment only relates to the capital investment. That doesn't relate to the day-to-day expense or something. We can discuss offline to understand more in terms of what other investment you are suggesting or looking. So I think we are fine with it. Uh,
Yeah, most of the questions Alok you have covered.
uh, yeah, Buji, we can discuss about crypto also later. In fact, we had launched a crypto report with your story sometime back, and with now there is a change how Supreme Court is treating crypto. So just a clarification. Uh, so many people think that crypto is legal now in India and there is no problem. However, that's not the case. Is so what has happened is that the RBI one fine morning issued a notification saying that no banks are allowed to render services to any of the SSEs who deal in crypto. So it was a blanket restriction on banks. So what Supreme Court has done is that Supreme Court is saying that that notification was not right and was not legal, because RBI cannot restrict banks to not to help for a particular business, because crypto per se is not illegal as such. There are concerns in terms of money laundering and terrorist funding and other things, and which governments globally say that crypto might bring in, but there is no illegality in crypto as such. So the Supreme Court has said that this notification is illegal, and the Supreme Court is saying to the government to please formulate law and rules properly in terms of how crypto can be looked into in future. So the government has not come up with any rules or have not formulated any rules at this point of time. uh, Banks, to my mind, smaller banks, private banks, banks at branch level might help in opening bank account, but on a larger premise, banks are still very, and they are still not very cooperative for crypto transactions. So I think, but we can take it offline. We can discuss in detail. As we said, just to close, we are a global firm, and we have interests in cryptos and global technologies, and we just sometime back we launched our Singapore investment banking firm also. So we will be more than happy to answer your queries. I have already pinged my email ID, Rahul's email ID, and I think Learning Lab will make this video and put it on Facebook soon. Today we could not do it because of some hitch. So Saras, over to you. Thanks for inviting, and over to you.
Thank you, Alok. Thanks a lot for your time. If anyone have any doubt or anything, means we can put a presentation PPT. Alok will put a PPT on the group, and you can ask the question in that thread itself.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
it
yeah.
okay, Alok? Means
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, it's perfect. Thanks for inviting again, and happy to answer any queries and happy to help you in your global structure. More than happy to do that. Thanks, Rahul, also for a very detailed presentation. And let's stay connected, stay safe. Thank you.
definitely. Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Alok.
Thanks.
Thank you, Saras. Thank you, Alok, and thank you to all the people